Hello students, let's continue with discussion on Elaine Showalter's essay towards a feminist poetics. In previous two sessions, we have discussed so far about the key concerns of feminism and feminist theory along with Elaine Showalter's contribution in the field of feminist studies. And in the session 2, we have discussed in detail the first section of this very important essay where Elaine Showalter is just talking about the two distinct varieties of feminist criticism as feminist critique and gynocritique. And while talking about the second category or the second variety of feminist criticism, Elaine Showalter has pointed out towards the need to trace the female tradition, to just conceptualize the female tradition to make the field of feminist criticism more effective and more analytical. So by now it is quite clear to us that Elaine Showalter is the critic who gave a new definition to feminist literary criticism with her concept of gynocritique. And she is a feminist who emphasized the need to establish the continuity of female tradition in this particular essay. So today our special focus will be on how she has attempted to trace the continuity of female tradition with special focus on women novelists, and how she has just categorized or divided this evolution of female tradition. So let's begin with an analysis of the second section of this essay, or the closing section of this essay. She talks about three phases in evolution of female tradition. Here student, I just want to make one thing clear to you, that in her book A Literature of Their Own, she has earlier recorded these three phases of evaluation of female tradition, and here she is referring to these three phases of evolution of female tradition as an important aspect of her theory of gynocritique. So let's first know what these three phases are. These are feminine, feminist and female. Now we'll have a detailed discussion about these three phases of female tradition, that what does Elaine Showalter want to show through these phases of evolution. The first phase, feminine. According to Elaine Showalter, the time period for this particular phase is 1840 to 1880. The dominant trait of this period is that women writers, they imitated men writers. And the very distinguished sign or the chief characteristic of the literature of this period or the women writers of this period was the male pseudonym. This was the time when the female writers or the women writers, they just used male pseudonym to make their writings acceptable socially. For example, you are all familiar, and we have also discussed in previous session also, that Mary Evans, she wrote with the pen name George Eliot. So this was the special trait of this very phase. And thirdly, in this very period, because women writers, they tried to imitate men, they tried to just copy the style of the men writers, or according to Elaine Showalter, I quote, women wrote in an effort to equal the intellectual achievements of the male culture, and they internalized its assumptions about female culture, unquote. So we can say that it is an interpretation of text from a feminist perspective. So the feminist content in the writings of this very phase is oblique, is displaced, is ironic or somewhat subversive. And 1880 onwards, the second phase is mentioned by Elaine Showalter. The time period for this phase is 1880 to 1920, and Elaine Showalter calls this phase a feminist phase. And as far as the chief traits or the central tendencies of this phase are concerned, the first and foremost thing is that in this age, women advocated minority rights and protested. Or we can say that the feminist phase was characterized by women's writing that protested against male standards and values. They advocated women's rights and values. A special focus was there on right to vote during this phase. Then in their demand or advocacy for the women's rights and values, including a demand for autonomy, there was a rejection of accommodating postures of femininity during this phase. And in this phase, the women's writing was based on using literature to dramatize the ordeals of wronged womanhood. And with this change from the imitating male culture to protesting for the rights, the women writing enters the third phase, that is named as the female phase by Elaine Showalter, and it's since 1920 this phase is ongoing. And we can say that in this phase, the women writings, and there is a rejection of imitation and protest. In the first phase, there was an imitation of the male culture, male writings and male style, and in the feminist phase, there was a tendency of protest against the male standards. But in the third phase, female phase, there is a complete rejection of imitation and protest, because both these tendencies, they are explained or pointed out by Elaine Showalter as dependency on male culture, dependent on male dominance. So there is rejection of both these, imitation of male oriented style and protest against male standards. And it is basically concerned with emphasis on female experience, not to imitate anyone and not to protest against anyone, but to just stress upon or emphasize upon the pure female experience. So in this way, this third phase is a sort of extension of feminist analysis of culture to the form and techniques of literature also. And while talking about that how the female culture or female standard has been just incorporated to the forms and techniques of literature, Elaine Showalter talks about the nature of the criticism. She says that the most natural direction for feminist criticism to take has been the revision and even the subversion of related ideologies, and especially the Marxist and structuralism. But according to Elaine Showalter, that feminist criticism cannot go around forever in man's ill-fitting hand-me-downs. But she emphasized the need to move forward on the line set by the critics like John Stuart Mill, who wrote about women's literature, and he emancipated women's literature from the influences of accepted models, and it was guided itself by its own impulses. So this is how that she thinks about, or she plans or about the gynocritics, or the real nature or the true nature of feminist criticism. And she feels that nowadays we are moving towards a two-tiered system of criticism. And what is that two-tiered system of criticism? Elaine Showalter talks about higher criticism. that higher criticism deals with the scientific problems of form and structure of writing. This higher criticism is concerned with, we can say, it is based with the form only. It is based with the technique only, and then there is the form of the criticism. The system of the criticism, which is called lower criticism, it deals with the humanistic problems of content and interpretation. And these two levels, they seem to Elaine Showalter that both these labels are now taking on subtle gender identities. So in this situation, there seems to be a split. There seems to be a division, a diversion, and that is the reason that Elaine Showalter finds that there is a deadlock in feminist criticism. In the concluding part of her essay, she talks about the current theoretical impasse. Elaine Showalter just talks about the current theoretical deadlock in feminist criticism towards the end of this essay. And Elaine Showalter believes that this theoretical deadlock is not only a problem of finding exacting definitions for feminist criticism or finding a suitable terminology for feminist criticism, or it is not a problem of theorizing in the midst of a struggle, but she feels that the reasons are somewhat deeper. And as she writes in the closing part of the essay, I quote, that this theoretical impasse, or this deadlock, I quote, this comes from our own divided consciousness, the split in each of us. She is pointing towards the split. She is pointing towards the divided consciousness of feminist critics. And she further says, we are both the daughters of male traditions and sisters in a new women's movement. So the problem lies in this split. And she has elaborated upon this very idea of being daughters of male tradition and sisters in the new women's movement. She says that we are both the daughters of the male tradition, of our teachers, our professors, our dissertation advisors, and our publishers. And this very tradition asks us to be rational, marginal, and grateful. So, being the daughters of male tradition, we are to follow an approach which is to be rational, marginal, and grateful for what we have and what we are. But on the other hand, as sisters in a new women's movement, which engenders another kind of awareness, another kind of commitment, because it demands that we renounce the pseudo-success of token womanhood and the ironic mask of academic debate. And Showalter feels that how much easier and how less lonely it is not to awaken and to continue to be critics and teachers of male literature, anthropologists of male culture, and psychologists of male literary response, claiming all the while to be universal. She just appeals that we cannot will ourselves to go back to sleep. So as women scholars, as the true feminists, what is the task of the feminist critics? She just writes in the closing note of the essay that the task of the feminist critic is to find a new language, a new way of reading that can integrate our intelligence and experience, our reason and suffering, our skepticism and our vision. So now here she has also made it very clear that this enterprise of finding a new language or finding a new way of reading is not confined to women only. And in the very last sentence or the closing sentence of the essay, she just invites even the male critics to share it with us, share it with the female scholars, and she just closes her essay on a very optimistic note that one thing is certain, that feminist criticism is not visiting. It is here to stay, and we must make it a permanent home. So we can say that in this very argumentative and analytical essay, Elaine Showalter has very clearly mentioned two distinct varieties of criticism and how accurately she has termed, or she has just traced the continuity of female tradition and how she has just effectively appealed to the feminist critics to work upon a clear guideline without any split or without any diversion, to find a new language and a new way of reading that can integrate intelligence and experience, reason and suffering. Thank you.